You about, I know you've gotten a number of questions, both of you, about drug trafficking issues, and I believe Senator Donnelly asked you about cocaine. In my state, we have a heroin epidemic right now, and I see this as incredibly troubling. We've seen a dramatic increase in the number of drug deaths in New Hampshire, and I don't believe New Hampshire is unique with regard to what's happening right now with heroin. Can you, both of you, give me a sense of what's being done in terms of countering transnational organized crime with regard to heroin and access to heroin? And also, I was just in the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Johnson was before that committee, and I asked him about this. How are we coordinating, if you think about the efforts between DHS, Northcom, Southcom, and also state and local partners? How are we all working together on this issue that I really think is an epidemic?
First of all, heroin has moved out of the inner city, the working class neighborhoods of America, and certainly is now in the suburbs. Unfortunately, and I'll speak frankly as a guy that grew up in a very, very drug-infested part of Boston as a kid and saw most of my friends die, mostly of heroin overdoses. All of a sudden, it's got attention because Hollywood actors are dying of it, or as I say, it's moved into the suburbs of America. It's an epidemic. I think in the last 5 years, the amount of heroin increase, consumption of heroin has increased by
New Hampshire had
leaps and bounds.
A 70% increase in drug deaths on this.
Most heroin, vast majority of heroin that's consumed in the United States is actually produced in Latin America. The poppies are now grown in places like Guatemala and Colombia, places that we try to work with, but again, have tremendous restrictions on how much. But the poppies are grown here. The heroin is produced primarily in Mexico and then moved across the border. The distribution network that it rides on is the same network that works cocaine, the same network that works methamphetamines. I just met last week with Secretary Johnson myself on this issue. I also met last week with the head of the FBI on this issue. So we do coordinate a lot. But as one of Secretary Johnson's staffers said to me, you know, the place to fight this stuff is not on the 1 yard line, and that's the Mexican-American, the border. The place to fight it is on the other end of the field, and that's really down in Latin America. And I'll turn to Chuck because he works the Mexican piece more than I do.
Thank you.
It's very troubling the way the adaptability of the transnational criminal organizations to move from one product to the next. And so obviously heroin's become more profitable, it's easier to transport, and they now have production and processing facilities closer by to the market. So this is a good market value for them to be pushing heroin. I'm heartened by the activities of the Mexican security forces, particularly the Marines and Sedena. They've gone after cartel leaders. They've gotten the cartel leader of the Zetas, the Gulf, and Sinaloa in recent takedowns. But taking down leaders is really necessary, but not sufficient in putting pressure on these networks that are so powerful and so adaptable that they can change market strategies, distribution networks, and products that are flowing across them. At the border specifically, which should be the last line of defense, we have Joint Task Force North that works directly for Northcom, and through Joint Task Force North, we provide a variety of military support to law enforcement agencies along the border. It's very well received. It's high payoff for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that provide that support. And I believe that it's a dollar that we put against helping our partners be better on the border against this threat to our country is a huge savings in how we defend and respond to problems within the country. So it is good work for us to do. It's well coordinated, but it's wholly dependent on the amount of counter-narcotics funding that we receive to do that each year.
And I was going to ask you, so what more do we need to do?
I received $9.5 million this year in funding to support federal authorities on the southwest border.
And just to be clear before we leave this topic, these networks that we're talking about, Are these not also networks that are supporting terrorist funding? They're supporting human trafficking, so you cannot separate the two to say, you know, somehow there's one network that's just trafficking drugs, and then there's another network doing all these other horrific activities, which are obviously just as bad for the country.
It's my opinion that that is exactly how we should view these networks.
So they are a direct threat to our country, not just obviously the threat we face to our people and to our children with regard to what happens with heroin addiction, but also just in terms of, you know, terrorism threats, human trafficking, all the other issues related, correct?
I believe the President's statement in July of 2011, when he identified these organizations as threats to national security, that's exactly what he meant. Many of these organizations have reached a state of power and global influence that they exceed the capacity of most of our partners' law enforcement to deal with it.